Good morning. It's Friday on the Fountain Cast. I think it's episode 5. I'm here with Matt Chabot. We have a
We're
special guest
back.
today as well. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But Matt, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited again to see Chris Bubich pitch. I'm hoping that I'll be able to find a
To
broadcast of
see
it.
it with your ears, maybe. I don't know if
Yay.
there's a broadcast. Once again,
It never is.
it's like the one game they did have a broadcast. They're like, all right, let's put the C team in there.
Yeah, well they've done it. They've done two broadcasts for the Royals and both times it's been Champlain pitching and like that rotation of guys and I
Yeah,
want to see Chris Bubich.
he looks good from people
Yeah,
that can actually see him.
right.
But yeah, what time is that game today? Like noon again?
Yeah, I
I guess
think
noon
so.
for me. It's not
Noon
noon for
for
anybody
you.
else. Yeah. Yeah, 2:10 Central Time. So we do have also join us a little bit later today. We have Jack Johnson of Locked On Royals and Sports Radio 810. So very excited to have him on. We'll talk about his time in Arizona. He had some time in spring training, so just kind of get his thoughts. And then outside that, we'll just talk about some guys that are standing out in Arizona, some of the depth guys. So a little bit of a shorter episode today, but we're doing once a week, so we're not going to bog you guys down with hour long episodes every single time. So with that, let's get into the news and notes. There's not too much, but there's a bit. Matt, first up, Dyron Blanco had Achilles tenderness, I think is what they said, soreness. He was scratched on Monday, didn't play. Supposed to undergo an MRI on Tuesday. As far as I know, he did. We haven't heard anything since, which I don't think that's usually good news.
No, the Achilles injuries are always tough. Everybody knows that's kind of the worst injury in sports, especially if it's torn. That has such a long recovery rate. Um,
Yeah,
I think some people might be making a bit of a bigger deal about it than it is. It's Dyron Blanco. I like Dyron Blanco. He's a good energy guy, steals a lot of bases, but not much more than that unless he has the crayon in his hands. So, um, you
yep,
know, he's going to be fighting for a roster spot with Weimer, but mostly just as a base runner. I mean, that was Blanco's value last year, was stealing bases, and he was really good at it. But um, an Achilles injury is going to hinder your ability to steal bases. So an update will be interesting. But if they say tenderness, it likely means they know it's not torn. So it's probably a sprain of some kind, and the recovery will be important. But uh, he is fighting for a roster spot. So
yep. Yeah, I mean, no news could be good news. Maybe no matter what they find on that MRI, they're going to give him time to rest because, like you said, his contribution is speed.
yeah,
So that Achilles is huge for that. So something we'll monitor. But like you said, he's not. I didn't really expect him to make the roster personally. He's a good piece. I don't think he's as good as like a Jared Dyson back in 2015. Not as good offensively, not as good defensively. He's a good guy. I wish him the best. I just don't know if he really factored in.
he's fun to watch. I think exactly what you said. The difference with Blanco that kind of might scratch him off the roster is that despite his blazing speed, he's really not that good defensively. He doesn't really
Yeah,
track the ball all that well, and his route to the ball isn't great. And I'll never forget the one game he played in right field where the ball was kind of just lined right at him, and he jumped for the ball and was like 3 feet away from it. That was kind of I'll never forget that play.
yeah.
he
Such a weird thing. You'd think a guy with his speed would be a bit better defensively, but like you said, it's
right,
those jumps. I think
yeah.
somebody who will make the roster, unless things get worse. Reliever Carlos Estevez. He's dealing with some back tightness, just day to day right now. He's a veteran guy, so I think he can get by with a little less time in spring. He'll be all right. But nonetheless, something to monitor. Luckily for the Royals, they have built such a deep bullpen that I don't think you're not too stressed about it, really. Obviously, you want your best guys there on opening day, and I think he probably will be, but day to day as of right now.
Yeah. Quintero said he'd be back, get him 7 to 8 reps before the end of spring training, so not
Yeah.
too concerning.
Yep, he should be there. Only other real news we have, we were talking before the show. Neither of us lives in Kansas City, so we don't vote. So for that reason, we don't really cover the stadium talks too much. But there is some news in that front. It looks, at least earlier in the week, all things were indicating that it looked like the Royals and Chiefs were both maybe moving to Kansas. And then yesterday, there's talk that Missouri had come up with their own proposal for a stadium. So a little more traction there. There's absolutely nothing in the works. I did talk to somebody that was in Arizona, and they chatted with John Sherman, and he told them the same. They asked, there's no deal for a stadium right now. He's optimistic they'll have one soon, but yeah, it's just a waiting game. I hate the stadium talks. Even if I did have a vote, like, it's just too political for me. I just want baseball, you know?
Yeah, I wanna play, spend the money on the team. My family lives on the Kansas side. I obviously don't live in Kansas, but my family lives on the Kansas side, so I know they're kind of rooting for that, but they already live pretty close to the stadium, so they're indifferent.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I grew up in Liberty on the east side, on the Missouri side.
Yeah.
So, I mean, no matter what, we were driving to the stadium. Even if I still live there, like, there's like a pride I think that goes into it. Like, you wanted to be in Missouri, but they're still going to be in the Kansas City area. Whatever gives the team the best environment, the best atmosphere. Obviously, more fans. That's what matters. I don't really care where the stadium is.
Absolutely.
But again, I don't live there, so I don't have a dog in the fight anymore.
Yeah, I have no say in the matter.
So yeah, with that, I mean, that's the news and notes. Like I said, it's pretty short today. Pretty soon we'll be joined by Jack Johnson. He does the Locked On Royals podcast, does outstanding with that. Also does work with Sports Radio 810 WHB. So we're gonna get his thoughts on spring training. He did outstanding coverage last week. I don't think I've seen anybody do better coverage in Arizona so far this year. Obviously, Andy Rogers does great. Jalen Thompson does great, but I think there's certain things that they're not willing to put out there or to cover just because the team, I think, maybe asks them to cover certain bits a bit more.
Yeah, being
So we'll get Jack in here. We'll get his thoughts. But before he hops in, Matt, we're I guess a full week. Yeah, a full week into spring training. What's the biggest standout for you so far?
Kevin Biggio is the guy who's kind of blowing up in spring training right now. I think that he has made himself a lock to make the roster. I think it was kind of close between him and Lofton, and then the potential of maybe bringing in somebody else. But I think he locked down a roster spot. He's played third base, second base, first base,
Yeah,
has hit
he's
really
all over.
well.
Yeah,
Quatraro loves those utility guys. He's a lefty bat, which they were looking for in the infield. I think he's pretty much locked down his spot on the roster. I said it the other day on Twitter that I think he's all but guaranteed his spot with the team.
yeah, and that's not even a knock Nick Lofton because he's been outstanding in spring too. But I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I'm going to pull it up because I could be wrong. I just don't think Nick Lofton has been as versatile as we once saw him as. I mean, he's
No,
played like I don't think
I
he's
don't think
played
he
outfield
hasn't.
really.
I would say he hasn't played much in the outfield, and his defense hasn't been as good on the infield, I think, as people wanted. You know, he's mostly been
Yeah.
second base. He played a little bit of third base, and that went away quick after people realized how much they missed Michael Garcia's defense at third base. And
Yeah,
he was all right at first for a little bit, but that was about it.
yeah, for sure. All right, I got Jack Johnson waiting. Let's get this guy in here.
All right.
Hey, what's up,
Hey,
guys?
Jack, how's it going, man? Welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Hey, pretty good. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Had to wrap up a little bit later than expected.
That's all right, man. No, you're a busy guy. We did a bit of an intro for you before you hopped in, but obviously Jack Johnson, Locked On Royals, you do great things over there. Also with Sports Radio 810 as well. The best coverage we've seen in Arizona so far this season by far. So kudos to you doing great work down there. Hopefully you had a good vacation, a brief one after that as well. But thanks for hopping on. We appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, good vacation, but would have definitely liked a few more days in surprise considering what was going on. But no, thank you
Yeah.
for all the kind words.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's get into it. That's really the biggest thing today is we just wanted maybe a bit more detailed thoughts on your time in Arizona, what you saw while you were down there. But just briefly to start, were there any standout players, maybe one hitter, one pitcher that you saw while you're there? The stats maybe tell fans one thing, but it's different if you're there, right? You can hear the bat, you can see the arms. What were some guys that stood out for you?
It might be a cop-out answer, but everything we heard down there was about Jac Caglianone. I mean, the BP that he took, what the players were saying, it was different, right? And to me, going down there, we all assumed that he was going to be a talking point. We all assumed that when the fans were in attendance, they were going to go watch his BP. But to hear that from multiple players, I talked to Bobby, I talked to Michael Massey, both those guys brought him up as it's different, right? He's been impressive, and it really was the sheer size, too. Like, that's not everything in baseball, but when he would walk into the clubhouse every single day, like, he's a staggering human being. He is a large person. And I remember a couple times I was in the clubhouse in the last 3 years, there'd been a few that when they walked in, you went, damn, that's a pretty big dude. Dylan Coleman was one of them. And then probably just Jac Caglianone. Like, those two guys, when they walked in, you went, that's just not, that looks like a football player, basically. That looks like a tight end or a left tackle. And so his BP rounds, they were so impressive. Didn't get too many opportunities to see him at first base. There was one day I did, but they were just getting some fungos, early on in practice. Nothing too crazy. On the pitching side of things, there were two that stood out. Noah Cameron being one. His stuff looked electric, at least in this live BP session. And then Steven Cruz was the other, right? So they have these fields set up where during the live BPs and that, you kind of move around because they're all switching pretty quickly. So I had the opportunity to watch Steven Cruz a little bit, and he was the only one that you could hear the ball every time he was thrown. Like, you could just hear the zip every pitch he threw. And the guys that were going up against him were Nelson Velasquez, Michael Garcia, and I want to say it was Jac Caglianone. And he struck out Jack on 3 pitches or 4 pitches.
Wow.
That stuff is legit. And now that Carlos Hernandez has had, one bad outing in spring, it's not going to surprise me if he's one of those guys that gets onto the roster, because the stuff is good. He's finally harnessed it a little bit. But Noah Cameron, too. Everything you guys have said about him, everybody that's been following Royals minor league stuff and trying to bring attention to him, it's legit. To see that in person for the first time, that is big league stuff, not just, oh, those are good minor league numbers. Like the spin rate, this sounds weird to say, but you can see it. Like, that ball spins a lot. And his off-speed pitches, they really were working well. He got some ugly swings, even on guys that have played in the big leagues before. And he's already done that a little bit, too, in spring training.
Nice.
I love to hear about Steven Cruz there. I like him a lot. He's kind of similar to Caglianone. He's a big old dude. And I feel like he's kind of been what the Royals were hoping they'd see from Carlos Hernandez, where he's got that big, strong fastball with good spin. And I've been talking about him as like he has all the power stuff that you look for, but it's really good to hear that he's, commanding the stuff and looking good in spring, because I would really like to see them be able to work with him and get him in the bullpen, because his skill set is really impressive.
Yeah, he's an interesting case. I think there's not really a lot of talk around him so far this spring, but his stuff, like you said, Jack, it's legit. He's just got to command it. He's got to find his own. And I think he hasn't really gotten a fair shot. He just hasn't really gotten a chance in the bigs. So it'll be interesting how that shakes out. Jack, what about the big league guys? We talked some about, Cameron, Cruz, Cags, these minor leagues or prospect types. What about, Michael Massey, Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny Pasquantino? What are, kind of the vibes around the team? What's kind of the sense in that locker room or on the field that you get?
Well, it's such a close group. And I've said this a few times before in the amount of years, which hasn't been too many, but I have covered the Mike Matheny era. I have covered the Matt Quatraro era. And it was nothing against Mike Matheny. He just was a very intense manager, and it wasn't in a mean way by any means. And I believe Preston and Matt, you guys would know this, but he treated every game like it was Game 7 of the World Series. And yes, on the surface, that sounds phenomenal, where you have a manager, it's do or die every single game. But in reality, there's 162 games to play. If you are treating a Sunday getaway game against another last place team as Game 7 of the World Series, it's stressful. It can stunt the growth of some of these younger players that are trying to find their footing. And back then, it was just a tense and tight clubhouse. Not that they didn't like each other, but when you would go down there, there was a certain energy about it that felt like, man, this is every single game is so nerve-wracking, even though they were so far out of it. And now under Matt Quatraro, these guys are looser. They are a lot closer. And I saw that last year with Tommy Pham and Yuli Gurriel and Robbie Grossman coming to the team, which was, these are guys that hadn't been there at all the entire year, and they just meshed immediately. And that's because of guys like Vinny Pasquantino, for guys like Michael Massey, Bobby Witt Jr., they make it inviting. These guys are really close together. It's built a winning culture to an extent. They got to do it more than just 1 year. But down in Surprise, you see those guys walking into practice together. You see them mingling with different players. When they're taking BP, they're chatting it up a little bit. They all appear to be very close. And I do understand that to a fan, you go, okay, yeah, they're around each other all the time. They're friendly with each other. But I can tell you this, that in those previous years, you would see guys be close together, but it just was in groups. Like the younger guys would hang out with the younger guys. Some of the 1-year veteran deal guys, they either kept to themselves or they were talking with guys they once played for before Kansas City. Now it's everybody. Everybody seems close together. They are tightly knit. And I'm sure that the success last year has amped that up a little bit. There is this not ego or overconfidence, but they are a confident group. They don't look at last year and say, well, we were this Cinderella story. We were a good field story for the rest of baseball. They feel like the loss to the Yankees in the ALDS was a stain on last year. They kept saying, that's a sour taste in our mouth. We felt like we were good enough and better than that to lose in 4 games, lose both games at home. And that starts up top. That starts with Matt Quatraro. That starts with all the leaders in that clubhouse. Vinny Pasquantino being one of those guys. Michael Massey now being one of those guys. And to see success at the big leagues, it allows you to confidently step into a role like that. Vinny's had success. Michael Massey's now had success. Bobby's had success. Reagan's has. Then you got the veteran pitchers in Walker and Lugo. When you see it and you prove to your teammates, hey, I am a good big league caliber player, well, guys look to you a little bit more and say, you know what? I understand what they're trying to do here. We are trying to win. And leaving Surprise, I got this sense that they know they can win the division. It's not a, well, if the cards fall, into our hands and it's a good hand, or if things fall in our direction, then we're going to win the division. I left camp believing they are 100% confident they can win this division. And not just that, they should win this division because of how they fared last year.
Yeah, I think you can see that even when you're not in Arizona, like just on TV last year, like the boys are playing some ball with the shirts, and like they clearly are, they're having fun when they're playing baseball. And it's still a game. It's their full-time job, but those people, they're still playing a game. Like this is something they do all year, but they're smiling, they're playing the game. I mean, it was something we loved about Salvador Perez for so many years, that he played baseball with a big old smile on his face everywhere that he went. And they are clearly having fun, and it is definitely a different vibe than the past. I mean, that, and with the pitchers, like they were getting along last year with them, all the jokes and stuff coming out about the Royals pitchers having conversations after the game about how they, bullied you off the plate. Like it definitely seems like they're closer, and not just that they're closer, but they're enjoying the game of baseball, which is so important.
Yeah, that's refreshing. I think, those 2022, 2023 teams, you had MJ Melendez coming up, Vinny Pasquantino coming up, Bobby Wood, and these guys were coming up as, okay, you're this highly touted prospect. You have to help us turn this around. Whereas now it's like, we just have to do what we're already doing. And I think, like what you said, Jack, we can see that confidence on TV. We can see it on the field. But you, as somebody who is actually there and in the clubhouse, I think that speaks volumes, especially that difference between Matheny and Quatraro, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, with Matheny, too, I feel that he got a bit of a bad rep because he was coming from St. Louis. He had spent some time not managing, and he really did want to make it work here. And it was just his style, right? He was an old school manager, and his style was, hey, every single day we are given 150%. And that will resonate with some players. It won't resonate with all of them. As we know, baseball players are human beings. They have different personalities. And every player I talked to with Q, they said how much they loved him as their manager. That, look, you're not just managing a baseball team. You're managing adults. You are a boss to them. And if you are going down to the clubhouse and breathing down their neck and expecting 200% when they're getting dressed in the clubhouse, that can wear on you over the entirety of the season. Whereas Q, I believe he treats them as adults. He treats them as, hey, we're all in this together. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to get on you if you're not doing your best, you're not hustling. But it was the perfect hire for this specific team. Mike Matheny for another team, maybe with more old school guys, more veteran guys, it would have worked out. But for a young group trying to find their footing, Matt Quatraro was the perfect hire for this team.
Yeah, there's a clear respect there for him, and then between him and the players as well. I mean, people clearly feel like he values them. He's patient with the young guys. I mean, how many times were people calling for benchings of certain players throughout last year, and he's given them time and bounce backs from a lot of guys. Angel Zerpa was one of my favorite examples of that last year. In the middle of the season, he went through a deep slump. They put him in AAA for a little bit. They sent him back up and gave him a significant role, and he bounced back really well. I mean, Quatraro knows his guys, and he believes his eyes and what he sees in camp, and he definitely treats them like they're guys that are capable of those things. So I also think that's something that you're able to see, and it's really refreshing, like Preston said, to just hear that, the difference in the energy around Kansas City.
Yeah. Well, speaking of bounce backs, Jack, MJ Melendez, I don't think it's hyperbole to say this is the most important spring of his career, the most crucial season of his career, if he's going to put it together, right? So there's a lot of pressure with that. What are your thoughts? Do you think that he can work through that pressure? It was kind of a slow spring, and then he had a couple hits in the last few games. What are your thoughts on MJ Melendez? Does he have an everyday role with the Royals? What's his future?
It's so tough. Because I go back to what JJ Piccolo said at the very end of last year. It was that end of season press conference, and he defined MJ Melendez as perplexing. Like we don't really know why this is the output he's giving, because I know both you guys are, love analytics, love Baseball Savant, love those advanced numbers. You look at it on Baseball Savant, that's not the type of numbers he should be putting out. And I do wonder if it's luck based. He has some bad luck. I wonder if it's the stance that he had. We've all seen that he's changed it a little bit. And when I spoke to Q down in camp, I thought it was pretty fascinating that he said, well, look, it's his swing, it's his career. He had to come to us to make some adjustments. Not that the hitting coaches didn't give him feedback, but it was MJ going to them and saying, I feel like this would help me out a little bit more. I feel this is the best path for me to have a successful season. But Preston, you're exactly right. It is the spring of his career. It is really the biggest season of his big league career, because now that it's been back-to-back down years and he has struggled immensely, he doesn't have the benefit of the doubt anymore. Whereas last year you'd say, well, it's early. He's still a young player. We got to get him going. And he had a stretch where he was looking a little better in June. It just wasn't consistent. 2023, he didn't turn it on until late in the second half. And going into this year, you're not coming off a 106-loss season. That was what he almost had last year was, well, the Royals had a lot of pieces that needed to fit and things needed to go right. Now you're coming off the postseason. You are a contender. You are one of those teams that should get back to the postseason. If you're hitting $150 in April, they're not going to say, well, we got to keep trying this out. No, you have a large enough sample size now, and he may very well be that player that you just can't figure out. You don't understand why the numbers aren't there. This stance is far simpler. It's quieter at the plate. I believe that's going to help him. But what I'm looking for here is when things don't go well, which it doesn't matter if you're Bobby Witt Jr. or Nick Lofton on the roster. When things don't go well, what are you reverting to? Are you going to revert back to your old stance? He did that last year. There was the change in spring training. He struggled, and you saw slightly him go back to what he was in 2023. And that's what you don't want to see. If he starts in April, one for his first 15, but it's this new stance, don't abandon it. 15 at-bats is not enough. I want to see this quieter approach really help him out on some pitches he just couldn't hit with his stance last year. We saw in 2024 and 2023 with that stance, with the high leg kick, the hands where they were, it was down and in. Well, how is he going to hit high and away? How is he going to hit high and in? You can't with that high leg kick and where your hands are placed. Now with the bat resting on his shoulder, the load is a little bit simpler, I would say. I keep using that a lot, but it's not the Jose Bautista leg kick. I mean, it's just a slight weight transfer back, and that's going to help him on higher pitches in the zone, which could expand it a little bit, which could allow him to go to left field, to left center, because when he does that, that's when he's at his best. I'm not going to bank on him being a great player for the lineup. It would more so be a welcome surprise. If he puts up a Ryan O'Hearn type year, because that's what I like to allude to. Ryan O'Hearn looked hopeless when he left Kansas City. There was no way you could have looked at that and said, yeah, he'll be an all-star level player in Baltimore. It just happens sometimes. And hopefully with this new stance, this new approach, his coverage of the plate, it can work out. But I'm not even sure a good spring is going to be able to give you that confidence. It will just have to be in the regular season.
Right. We talked about it a little bit with it, similar story with Nelson Velasquez as well. Like, he had that breakout season. Then we said last week, some guys just hit the ball hard. They don't hit the ball hard in the right places, but they hit the ball hard, and other teams end up figuring them out. It'll be definitely disappointing if MJ Melendez moves on, goes to another team, plays left field, and hits with an 800 OPS. That'll stink. But I definitely I like the simpler approach. I agree that it's just he needs to make it easier on himself, and he needs to get the bat on the ball. I was talking with the Royals dugout account on Twitter the other day, and it really feels like the MJ Melendez experience is a classic, like, take off speed pitch up the middle, swing and miss at high fastball, and then strike out on a third pitch at least once every game. And he's got to stay in counts a little bit longer than that. And I think the simpler approach will really help him get the bat on the ball, see more pitches, and put the ball in play. He fights for everything. I will mention this every time I talk about MJ Melendez. He runs hard. He runs to first base with everything he's got every single time the ball is in play. And I really, really, really want to see him succeed. But I really hope the approach helps him just get more hits, get the ball, see more pitches. I think that'll be valuable for him.
Yeah, it's a fine line. I mean, we talked about Ryan O'Hearn. Before that, you had Mike Moustakas years ago, right? Before that, you had Alex Gordon years ago, right? It's a fine line, and the Royals, what they can't do is give up on a guy too early, which I think is why we see MJ Melendez still there. What they also can't do is, be that team that's scared for guys to leave and get better, which I don't think they are. But I think that's why, when you talk about most crucial season for Melendez, I think what we see without actually hearing it is the Royals have reached that point where, all right, you got to put up or shut up, right? And I root for Melendez. I wish him the best. The best thing for the Royals is certainly MJ Melendez putting it together. So we'll see what happens the rest of spring. And
You
we'll
got to
see
draw
what he
the
does.
line at some point. At some point, you have to say, like, we're done. We can't, I think that's going to, it's possible that happens with Melendez. It's possible it happens with Garcia. It's possible it happens with Hernandez. These are all guys they were hoping to develop over the last couple of years and didn't give up on. But at some point, if they're not putting up the production, they can have all the athletic traits and the power and the build and spin or speed, whatever you want to call it. They might have all this intangible stuff. But at some point, if it's not getting put together, you got to give another team a shot at it and move on to pick up somebody can produce a little bit better than that.
Yeah. The one thing worse than Melendez having an 800 OPS somewhere else is having a 600 OPS here.
Yeah.
You got to make that decision, right? What about some of the other standouts, Jack? Some outfielders, left fielders, right fielders, but some infielders as well. Tyler Gentry, he stood out in spring, I think. Kevin Biggio, he stood out in spring. Are there any other bubble guys or those two guys? What kind of, depth pieces stood out while you were in Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, they love Kevin Biggio. And even though he's on a minor league deal, look, he's not a typical minor league deal guy. I mean, the Royals wanted him last year. That's what Kevin told me down there. He said, they showed interest when I was on the waiver wire last year. So it was almost, I wouldn't want to call it manipulation, but they knew after being on 3 teams in 1 year, him going into the offseason, you don't need to give him a big league contract. You say, look, come to camp, we'll give you a minor league deal, but wink, wink, you should have an inside track because we're not re-signing Adam Frazier. We're not bringing back Garrett Hampson. You got a golden opportunity to take one of those spots. And look, when you are a utility guy, when you play multiple positions, you've got the advantage of that's at least valuable. With some of these other guys fighting for a roster spot, say Nick Prado, Nelson Velasquez, they're both out of options. In most scenarios, you'd say, well, they got the inside track because you don't want to DFA him. Okay, well, Nick Prado, not that great of a defender. They're not playing him in the outfield. Nelson Velasquez, not that great of a defender. And what's their floor at the plate? Well, we've seen with Nick Pratto, it's striking out 40% of the time at the big league level. With Nelson Velasquez, hey, we love the power. We saw it in 2023, 14 bombs in 40 games, but he does the exact same thing. And even last year, he lost all that power. And I know that in Andy Rogers' article, he said, my swing is improved. I feel closer to 2023. The unfortunate part in spring training, everybody says that. It's the best shape of my life talk where, oh, I've done this. I've done this. I feel much better. We all know they're going to say that. But for Biggio and Nick Lofton, if their bat's not there, well, hey, they can still play 6 or 7 spots on the diamond. And for Matt Quatraro teams, that goes all the way back to his Tampa Bay days, they value that. Why did Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson have a role for the entire year? Not because of their bat, not because even of their speed. When I'm talking to Garrett Hampson, it was because they could play pretty much anywhere on the diamond. And for Biggio, he brings a new element that Frazier and Hampton didn't have. He's got a great walk rate. And I've said that numerous times this offseason. Jonathan India, top 5 walk rate in baseball. When you're trying to get advantages in small spots on the roster, that might be one of them. Cavan Biggio might hit 200 this year for the Royals, but his on base might be 320. He might have an 11% walk rate, and that's still an improvement over what Frazier and Hampson had. And from everything we've heard down there, they love Cavan Biggio. At this point, I'm about 90% confident he's going to make the roster if he stays healthy. He might hit 250 in camp, but so far he's done enough. And the one thing that I've noticed, and I know you guys have as well, he's played 4 spots already. And if they're moving him around like that, it means that, hey, we just want to make sure you can play third, you can play second, you can play first. We know he can play the outfield. Nick Lofton, same thing. He's moved around a little bit. And I feel pretty confident now that Nick Lofton's taken the Hampson spot and Biggio's taken the Frazier spot.
Yeah, I like to hear that. He said, we were just talking before this and about Cavan Biggio and just before you got in here about him, and I said I think he's a roster lock for the team right now. I think that his utility value is nice. He's played first base, second base, third base, left field, right field in his career. We're talking about moving Jonathan India to outfield and Michael Massey to outfield. And if he makes the roster, you don't really need to do that because he can play the outfield. It gives you flexibility if, Hunter Renfroe struggles or whichever outfielder you bring up, Joey Wiemer, Nelson Velasquez, Nick Pratto, if those guys struggle, he can go play the outfield. And I think that we also know Quatraro loves the utility value of guys moving that lineup around, swapping guys in and out. If Garcia's struggling against righties, pull him out, get the lefty in there to face up against a righty. I think that his performance in spring was just an exclamation point on they already really wanted him on the roster. And I hear that from you. I like to hear that because he's had production in the past as well. With the Blue Jays, he had a good season. He just kind of slowed down. And I think that was also part of why the Royals were appealing to him was, we're not a big, like a high spending organization that's just going to move on if you struggle in spring training. Like, we're going to give you a real legitimate shot at making the roster, playing the utility role. So I'm really happy with what he's done. And I'm happy to hear from you that, they are also confident in him. That makes me feel good about what he can provide this season.
Yeah. Well, Jack. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
I know it's just a little bit of a delay on my end. So anytime I'm like, oh, should I jump in, whatnot? But no, you're exactly right, Matt. I mean, this is an organization that's not like what he experienced last year. He was in Toronto, he was in LA, and he was in Atlanta. He was barely in Atlanta. He had 5 at-bats, I believe. So more so the Dodgers and the Blue Jays. He was coming from the Blue Jays where he was a legacy kid. It was the baby Blue Jays with Vladdy Jr., Bo Bichette, and Cavan Biggio. Biggio was the only one that didn't work out. Eventually that pressure mounts a little bit and you aren't able to play the same way. There's a lot of heat. Then he goes to the Dodgers of all teams, and the Dodgers are going to expect excellence from the beginning. And Atlanta was another team, too, fighting for a playoff spot. For the Royals, it is a cheaper organization. I don't want to call them dirt cheap or anything like that because they've made moves the last 2 years. But in their existence, or you come to Kansas City, the spotlight's not immediately on you. He's a minor league deal guy. He would be a great story if he made the roster and played well this year. And I believe that more laxed approach, not having that type of pressure, it'll do wonders for him.
Yeah, it's a small market regardless, but I definitely think that, we don't need Craig Biggio. Like that nobody's looking for him to be Craig Biggio. His dad's a Hall of Fame baseball player, but you don't need to be him to be successful, especially in Kansas City where we have the big outfield. Fielding is valuable. Getting on base is valuable. You're playing with Bobby Witt Jr. and these other big guys, Perez and Pasquantino, who are going to get the big hits. We just need somebody who can be a consistent contributor, and it's an added value that he can play so many different spots. That's going to be really important. I think it'll be good for him to have a little bit less of a spotlight just on him of people like B. Craig Biggio in Toronto, and we need you to hit at the very top of the order and all that stuff. I think that'll be really good for him. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Well, Jack, of course, again, thanks for your time. Before we let you get out of here, I just want to run through maybe some rapid fire predictions you have for the 2025 season. Give as many thoughts as you want behind them. But let's start with your pick to be like a surprise standout in 2025.
I would venture a guess at, I do believe Jonathan India is going to surprise a lot of people. I mean, to have that type of hitter at the top of the order, it gives you that luxury of he may hit 240, 245 like he did last year. He also bring you a 350 to 360 OBP. If he's doing that at the top of the order, that is a night and day difference from what they had last year. I mean, and go back to the last 10 years for the Royals. How many true on-base guys did they have leading off? I really can't think of one. Whit Merrifield, as good as he was, leading the league in hits, never an on-base guy. He simply relied on ambushing and getting hot at the plate, which he did many times. Alcides Escobar, the anti-OBP guy. He would always ambush first pitch. Garcia, his cousin, same thing. Michael Massey, he's not really an on-base guy. Even Alex Gordon, when he was there for a little bit, not a true on-base guy. So India is that first one that I can recall in a long, long time. And I've said this before, where I believe he's got a great opportunity to put in a career year. The reason why is he's hitting leadoff, something he's done his entire career. But how many times in his career did he have an MVP candidate hitting in the 2-hole? You got an MVP candidate hitting in the 2-hole, you're going to get a lot of pitches to hit. They are not going to want to start every game working around you. And even if they are, this at bat he had yesterday, I just loved so much. It was 5 pitches. He never swung. And 3 of those pitches were maybe an inch or 2 off the plate. And that's where, as a pitcher, you go, that's the last person I want to face leading off a game, is somebody that has such a great concept of the zone. And I know that I also can't work around him. He's not going to swing. He is not going to chase anything out of the zone. So I got to give him pitches to hit. And Jonathan India is a capable hitter where you give him a 2-0 fastball in the zone, he's going to hit it. He's going to crush it. And if he gets ahead in the count, all the better for the Royals. And if he gets on base, as I expect him to, Bobby Witt Jr. is going to have a lot more production than he had last year, basically beginning every game with nobody on, 1 out.
Yeah. Last week I mentioned him as a potential guy who could lead the Royals in hits, because the difference with him this season versus last season with the Reds is that they're not going to want to walk him. You do not want to give Bobby Witt Jr. one guy on first base, maybe on second base, because we know India can move as well if he needs to, with no outs. And then Vinny behind him, Salvador Perez after that. He is, you may see the walk rate dip a little bit, but I also think he is going to get pitches to hit. He's going to swing the bat, and his skill set will be valuable. So I like that pick as well.
Let's flip the spectrum, Jack. Nothing personal, right? Nobody likes to, say, oh, this guy's going to stink. But maybe who's somebody that you're your outlook is they're probably going to be a disappointment. They're not going to be what we expect.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you said, nothing personal to it. I have a hard time believing that all of a sudden Kyle Isbell is going to turn into that league average hitter that we continue to say he is. I hate to do it because I like Isbell a lot. He is a great defender in center field. And yeah, we've said it for 3 years. Hit 250, right? Hit 250, and you're going to be a 3 or 4 WAR player. That's just fine in center field. But I look at the options of a Hunter Renfroe. We saw in the month of May and a little bit of June, he was a top 3 contributor in the Royals lineup. He's walking more than 11% of the time. He had a 350, 360 OBP clip. And that's possible for him if he can stay healthy. I also believe they could platoon Melendez and Renfroe out there in right field. Melendez in right today, of course. That's going to happen because India or Massey is going to be getting a chunk of the time in left field. So those guys having a lesser sample size this year, not being an everyday player, that gives me reason to believe they're not going to be as bad as they were last year. With Isbell, until somebody proves like a Joey Wiemer can defend center field as well as Isbell does, Isbell's going to be playing close to every single day, and I'm just not sold he's an everyday player. If there were advanced numbers that gave me reason to believe, hey, he's got to make a slight tweak there or a slight change here, I'd have that belief still. But unfortunately, in the years he's been in Kansas City, which you got to go back to 2021 now, it's just not there. I believe he's a true great defensive fourth outfielder, but the Royals don't have too much depth in center field, so you might as well take the defense there than rushing somebody else to play that position, and hopefully they would figure it out at the plate.
They went and got Wiemer for a reason, and they also have Rocafort on his way up, who is an incredible defender, probably the best defensive outfielder we have in the minor leagues. So I can see that. You know, we mentioned a couple other players last week. I didn't really think of Isbell as one of those guys, but it definitely is possible. You know, they stick him in the 9 hole because he is probably the worst hitter in that lineup. I mean, unless, you know, you see another stretch of cold Melendez, cold Garcia, where they go, 0 for 30 at the plate or whatever. But, the defense is all right now for Isbell. That is his value. It comes with just defense, and he is a spectacular defender. But Wiemer is also an impressive defender, and if Wiemer was a top prospect, has the frame, has the power, the intangible things, if he gets a little bit hot at the plate, Isbell's job becomes a little bit more in question. So that's a very good point to make. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't mentioned that before, but that's something I'll have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, he's not much of a walk guy, and obviously not much of a power guy, so he's got to find a way to hit for average.
They don't mind pitching to him either.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard for him to walk. They don't mind putting the ball in the zone. It's rare that he's going to put it even close to over the fence. So,
yep. Only a couple more, Jack. Third base. The Royals obviously have Maikel Garcia. They played Jonathan India there a little bit this spring. His arm, I think, looked a little iffy yesterday. Obviously, we talked about Cavan Biggio. Who's your pick? Who's going to be the starting third baseman for the Royals on August 1st?
Man, August 1st. I would still say Garcia, and the reason why is the Royals are an organization that values defense. And yes, Garcia's out there in center field today. I believe he's going to move around a little bit more than he did last year. But when you're moving a second baseman to left field, for example, because I know India played third base, I just don't see him there a lot. I don't see Massey at third base a lot this year. If you're going to move India or Massey in left field, well, you still want to make sure you got good defense at third. The reason, or the thing I've gone back to a few times this year is, well, are they going to move him to third base or are they going to move him to left field? If you move Jonathan India or Michael Massey to third base, there was a pretty drastic difference in defensive output from Maikel Garcia to Jonathan India. What's the change in Melendez to India or Melendez to Massey, right? There is going to be a little bit of a gap there. But MJ Melendez, as great as his arm is, he's a catcher playing the outfield. He's not that great of a defender, even as athletic as he is. So the reason I say Garcia is going to be there at third is, yeah, if MJ Melendez catches fire and he becomes the player we expect him to be or we hope he can be, well, he might be playing left field every single day. And then you got to get more creative with India and Massey because those two guys are going to be in the lineup every single day. But Garcia's defense over at the hot corner, it's such an advantage for him because the Royals have seen awful defense at third base there before. Hunter Dozier was unplayable at that position. Maikel Franco was not good at third base. Kelvin Gutierrez was bad at third base, and we don't notice it all the time. Like, that's what I've said with big leaguers. You put Salvador Perez in right field and you hit him a pop-up in batting practice, he's going to catch it. Like, these are capable guys, but you put a catcher in left field or right field and you hit him a slice from the right-handed side and they're in right field, that's tough to get. And for a third baseman, you give them that short hop, you give them a left-handed line drive to their left, it's going to be tougher to read. And Garcia is so good at that. And I believe Garcia can transition to the outfield as well. But on August 1st, even if Garcia is hitting 230, 240, the defense is so above average there that the Royals aren't going to have detrimental third base defense, and then detrimental left field defense, because now you're just relying on Bobby Witt Jr. to get everything, and anything down the line is basically not going to be an out.
Yeah, you just mentioned some names that gave me a little bit of a repulsive reaction. Those were some third base names I'd wiped from my mind, I think. I would agree that Garcia will stick for a little while. My question that I would add on top of that is, I mentioned last week that, I don't know, the Royals clearly value defense, and it definitely made the point that, the difference between Melendez, who was a subpar defender significantly last season, and a new guy in left field is not going to be that big. But how much is the value of third base necessary with how much range Bobby Witt has? That's been my question with Garcia, is that, you want to have power at third base as well. And Garcia's defense is valuable, but Bobby Witt is maybe a top 5 defender at shortstop, maybe the best. And his ability to make plays over there is exceptional. And so how much do you really need a guy who has that much range at third base when Bobby Witt can cover that much ground and you can maybe sneak the guy closer to the bag?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the bad part for Garcia is he's never really going to have power. I believe, and I fell victim for it last year, the Venezuelan League, and him hitting a leadoff home run on opening day and then a home run a few days later in Baltimore in their first road series. It changed his approach. And I'm sure, these guys aren't stupid. They know that position requires power. Garcia doesn't have it. And his best skill set is when he's going well, he's going to right center. He's going to right field. I sound like a cliche high school coach, but the line drives to right center to right field, that's when he's going his best. And defensively, they could live with a bad defender over there if that third baseman was a 25 to 30 home run guy. And they don't have one, unfortunately. Jonathan India is not that. Michael Massey could be that, probably closer to 15 to 20, but his defense and his arm wouldn't play well over there. So until the Royals get somebody that's got legitimate pop and legitimate power for that spot, there's not a need to move Garcia off third base. I believe they view Garcia as somebody that he hits the ball incredibly hard. He's got the tools, and he's a good defender over there. We can live with that until somebody in this organization, whether it be outside the organization or in their minor league system, develops as that, hey, this is a 25 to 30 home run guy. Not great defense, but you take that for the middle of the order.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jack, thanks for your time. I don't know if we went over. I'm trying to keep it at 30 minutes. I don't want to make you late for your next appointment.
Oh, you're all.
But again, thanks for hopping on. I appreciate all the insight. Great work in Arizona. Obviously, everybody check out the Locked On Royals podcast. You do great work over there. But we'll have to get together again soon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, guys. I'd love to join anytime. Yeah, I'll make sure the next time around we can have like an hour to talk, because I know we
No, you're fine. No worries at all. We will literally go like an hour and a half, so we gotta get ourselves a check on that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we could talk about Royals baseball all day.
Perfect. Well, I'd love to join anytime, guys.
All right. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Jack Johnson. It was great having him on. He has great insights. Does great work with Sports Radio 810 as well. So nice to hear a lot of those things, those tidbits from Arizona that you're not going to hear unless you're in Arizona, right? So
he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Steven Cruz was interesting. That's not a name I thought would come up.
I haven't heard that.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to keep an eye on his stuff throughout spring, because that's a name that's exciting to hear come up. Not just like a, maybe not. That the ceiling on Steven Cruz is really high. It's hearing his name come up like
he
that.
He just needs to command it. He needs to find the strike zone. That'll be the basic for him.
His 6'7", like the dude is a mammoth. If he can just keep that ball in the zone, wow, that'll be interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up, Matt. Last thing we're gonna go over today. I just got, like we said earlier, some of the depth guys. Go through kind of what they're doing this spring. Let's start with the hitters. I got 4 names: Tyler Gentry, Kevin Biggio. We already talked about them a bit. But then also Nick Lofton, and then a name who hasn't came up, Jordan Groshans. Out of those 4, I'll run through, their stats this spring so far. Gentry slashing 429, 857 as a home run and a walk. Nick Lofton's hitting 714. He's been absolutely insane at the plate.
That's crazy.
4 walks, a strikeout, 2 doubles. We already talked about Kevin Biggio hitting 429, has a 556 on base. And then Jordan Grosjean's not really much power. He's slugging 333, but he is hitting 333. He's got a 429 on base and a walk with no strikeouts. So, I mean, a good mix of depth guys. I mean, out of that list, everybody's got pretty solid numbers. Out of those four, I mean, there might be room for two, but who are the most likely? I think Biggio, we can already put him in there. We've already
100%.
talked about him about enough, but behind Biggio, out of those other three, who do you think is the most likely to make the roster?
I bet Quatraro's throwing a house party right now with the utility value of these guys. I think that he'll be really happy with this. I think that Lofton is the most likely guy to make it, and I probably would have said Gentry before hearing from Jack Johnson say that he sees Nick Lofton and Biggio as the Frazier Hampson type of group. And I was aware Lofton was hot. I didn't realize he was that hot. I'll be honest. I thought he was closer to like 500. I had looked at individual game stats, not the whole spring training. That's unbelievable. Oh no, he has one strikeout. Like that's incredible. And it is a small sample size, to be fair. We still got a month left of spring, but I think it definitely makes sense. You get a right-handed guy who has the utility value. You get a left-handed guy who has the utility value. So I think it's probably between him and Gentry. If Lofton stays even remotely this hot, that's such great value. And we knew he had utility stuff in the minors. Haven't seen it much in the majors. We also talked about that earlier. So, but I think him and Biggio would be the two guys that would make sense as utility guys off the bench. One's a little bit older, one's a little bit younger, right hand, left-handed, rotate them in and out as they can also hit as well, which, they both got good defense, but they also can hit. Lofton against lefties, Biggio against righties. I think the value's there for both of them. So Grosjean's intrigues me, but I think he'll start in the minors first. If he gets hot, then you start to have that conversation.
Yeah, it seems likely. It'll be big for Lofton. I think the versatility's big. I'd have to look in spring because I don't know. But like we said earlier, he just hasn't played the outfield as much, which might be fine, but it does limit that versatility some.
We wouldn't have to talk about Jonathan India or Michael Massey moving to third or left field if they felt like he could do that.
Yeah, exactly. It would be big for Lofton. I mean, this is a guy, I'm thinking back, probably 2022, after Bobby Witt and Melendez and everybody came up. Like, there was a time that, like, I would talk with Alex Duvall back when Royals Farm Report was still around. Like, there was a case for Nick Lofton to be the best prospect in the system at one point, and he just hasn't panned out for that. But anything he can do at the big league level will be more than we've seen from him, so it would be big.
Yeah, I think the utility value is a big part of his prospect profile as well, and not having that is a bit of a knock.
Yeah, it definitely lessens that some. What about some arms? These four guys, to be honest, I don't think any of them make the major league roster, but it's not a knock on them. So with these guys, more so look at, out of these four, who has the brightest future, and maybe rank them, put them in tiers. So Luinder Avila, 2 innings pitched this spring, hasn't given up a run. Looked electric with his arsenal. Steven Zobak, a little bit bumpier, has a 4.5 ERA over 2 innings pitched, but his stuff looked electric as well. And then Ben Kudrna, he had a scoreless 2 innings outing, didn't give up a run. Maybe a bit more iffy on his stuff, at least with his four-seamer, but his changeup has some potential on his slider if he can use that again. And then Andrew Hoffman actually leads the team in strikeouts, has 5 strikeouts this spring over 3 innings. Some tweaks, I think, to his mound positioning, where he's releasing the ball a little closer to third base. So out of those four, obviously a mixture when it comes to stuff, when it comes to results, when it comes to ceiling. But rate those 4 arms for me. Put them maybe in tiers.
All right, I might not make a lot of friends here, but I'm going to go with Avila number 1 just for the ceiling, because the spin rates were consistently insane from him. The velocity is there. The spin rates are there. He has a 0.5 whip. I mean, that stuff is unbelievable. I don't know that the Royals have a guy that has stuff like that. I mean, Ursigs is really, really good with that strong sinker. His changeup's unbelievable. But Avila's hitting with, the huge fastball and then almost 3,000 RPM on the curveball. And that thing just drops out of nowhere. Yeah. I did a scouting a report card for us earlier this year on him, and I mentioned that, you look at the stats and the production is not there yet, and the command is not always great, but he has 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. He's throwing the ball so hard, and he doesn't get great extension. He's on the smaller side, but I just love what he is capable of. And both the fastballs move, the curveball's crazy. I don't think he'll start in the majors. AAA will be a good, feel it out ground for him, kind of even some things out for him. That'll be good. I'm going to go with Zobek next. The command, I also think I did the report card for Zobek, and he might have the best command in the Royals farm system. And that's something that is, it develops over time, but it's something that you don't see from a guy this early in his career. And remember, he didn't start pitching until the junior year of his
his last year of college. Yeah.
And his senior year was his first time doing it fully. So it's incredible to see this much command from a guy who has only been pitching since it was 2019, 2018. That's really unbelievable stuff from him. I'd like to see him add another pitch. We've seen the Royals be willing to add sinkers, cutters, stuff like that to guys. I think that would be helpful for Zobek especially if he could get some more, get some command or feel for that pitch as well. I think he has to be able to, manipulate the fastball a little bit, make it harder for guys to barrel that pitch. But his stuff looked good for the other pitches. He has 3 really good offerings right now. And I'm really happy with that. Hoffman was not listed as a top 30 prospect for most people either. But he's looked really good in spring. The 5 strikeouts over 3 innings is really nice to see. I definitely see the arm angle is different. You can just see that on video, I think. You don't really have to have the advanced metrics to look at that. He's definitely swinging wider and stuff like that, making it hard to hit. So I think the ceiling is pretty high for him. And then I'm going to put Cutternut at the bottom. Not as much a knock on the potential for Cutternut, but it's just not there yet. I think he's young. He's still, we got him as a high school kid. There's no need to rush his development. It's just, he's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
I really want to see him add a pitch or two. I just don't, I'm going to live by, I don't like seeing starting pitchers with just 3 pitches. It's not my favorite thing to see by any stretch of the imagination. And so I want to see him and Zobek add another fastball, something like that. Just something to give them a little bit more option when they're struggling to get that punch out.
Yeah.
But both of them have the potential to reach it. But I'm going to go Avila, Zobek, Hoffman, Cutternut.
Yeah, I think with Kudrna, it's just he has 3 pitches. You'd like a 4th, but the fastball just isn't. I mean, he's at 95, but it's just not a great shape.
There's no shape. It's just straight line. It's like Hernandez's fastball too. Hernandez's is harder, but I feel like in my time watching Hernandez, I don't even care about the spin rate. That ball just looks like it goes straight. People were calling him dead middle 100 last season. 70% of his pitches were fastballs, 100 miles an hour, dead middle. Cutternut has a little bit more versatility with where he can place the ball, but it is a straight line pitch. It doesn't have much shape to it. So it has to be 95 or it's going to be really, really bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, with Zobak, he's only at 3 pitches, but his walk rate is half of what Kudrna's at. So you can live with that with the command rate. So a little bit more urgent for Kudrna to round out that arsenal or just to change that fastball a bit. I think I'd have him the same, aside from I'd probably flip Hoffman and Kudrna. I think Hoffman, he has a high ceiling, but I think it's as a reliever, whereas I think you can at least get Ben Kudrna into the rotation at some point. Might be as a 5-starter right now. I think as it stands right now, he's probably like a long reliever.
Right.
But he's young enough, like you said, that he can make tweaks. He can add a 4th pitch. He can make that fastball better. He just needs to develop a bit more.
Yeah, I want to see him rise. He's a Kansas kid that people want to root for him. You were catching some strays on Twitter the other day talking about him. People were not happy about that. So, but I agree. He's just not there yet. And it's okay that he's not there yet. That's not the end of the world. He might not be ready in 2026, but that's just fine. The Royals have starting pitching depth that I can be content with. I also would like to see, Cruz included on this list now. Again, Jack Johnson's really putting my eye on him. I got to take a look at him, but he might be he could be really exciting to watch. He might not be listed as a prospect right now. I don't know. He
I
had
think
some
he's
major
27, 28 by this point. He's a bit
but
older.
I'm okay with older relievers if they're throwing the way that he has the potential to throw. So
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's go with our hats off for this week. I actually made one that wasn't sarcastic for once, so that's good for me. Hats off to the Royals pitching development. The improvements. There was like some whispers about it in 2023. There should be like loud megaphone talks about it right now because we talked about Luinder Avila, we talked about Steven Zobak. Those are just two of the guys. Noah Cameron, he's a third. Like the system is full of these guys that they weren't. Like these aren't new guys to the system. They've been in the system for 2 years, 3 years. Some guys even longer. And we're seeing arms that weren't as successful, weren't as effective, become that, which is huge for the Royals. So hats off to those guys. Paul Gibson, Justin Friedman. It's just nice to see, man.
Sweeney's my guy.
Brian Sweeney at the big league level. The Royals, I don't think have ever really had that pitching development. Maybe in the 80s when they had these elite, Brett Saberhagen types, Kevin Napier. But hats off to the Royals for figuring that out.
Yes, Sweeney's been huge at the major league level too. There's guys that have been in the system forever. I mean, Daniel Lynch was so effective. It was like 29 innings. He didn't allow a run last season. We never saw that, even close to that, from Daniel Lynch before. He was so effective out of the bullpen later on. Chris Bubich took a huge step up. Cole Reagans became an ace pitcher after not cracking the rotation. I mean, Alec Marsh was a solid starter, and he was fighting for a roster spot. Like, really, really, really cool to see. I mean, we've been singing their praises all year, and it's great to see other people starting to catch some notice, but it's still not enough. They've been unbelievable. It's something we haven't seen from the Royals in a long time.
Yep.
I'm going to give a very, very, very painful hats off. And if you have not seen this, go watch it on YouTube. It stinks. Hats off to Michigan State basketball, who shattered the hearts of me and 20,000 other University of Maryland basketball fans at the sold-out game in Xfinity Center this Wednesday when Holloman hit a three-quarters court shot to win the game against University of Maryland after they came back down 9.
I gotta go watch that.
It hurts.
Sounds awful.
That was brutal. It was one of the first times Maryland has sold out that whole arena. 20,000-ish people in there, and it is loud. They were hitting 107 decibels, and Maryland misses a 3 to win it, and the kid pulled it from three-quarters court, and I am sitting right behind the basket, and the second he let go of it, there's a slew of everybody in the student section just like they knew. Man. Maryland fans have had heartbreak for years, and a mix of a hats off to Maryland fans for continuing to show up to basketball games and sports despite the severe heartbreak they've suffered for decades from now, since 2002. But Michigan State, hats off for winning in unbelievable fashion. I have to give credit where credit is due, because that's a little bit more than just luck to hit that shot.
Yeah,
and
that's crazy.
If you have yet to see it, go watch and remember my despair while watching it, because that was one of the worst sports losses I have experienced in my entire lifetime, because I was there, it was in person, and it was one of the best sports environments I have ever attended. And to lose in that fashion, well, it was so packed in Xfinity Center. I mean, it's not brutal. Like that. Kansas fans may be used to having a sold out crowd. They don't do that in Maryland the way y'all do. So it was unique, but if you haven't seen it, it's incredible. It's a great shot from Holloman, but hats off to Michigan State continuing to fight through Maryland's comeback, that loud crowd, and Maryland fans keep showing up. Please, this is the best team we've had in decades.
I was going to say, I don't follow college basketball too closely, but at least you could take solace in the fact that Maryland's probably better than Kansas this year.
Yeah, this is the first time I think Maryland has been ranked in a long time. I was talking to another guy who's a Kansas fan. I was saying when Hunter Dickinson was deciding between the two, I was like, I can't lose. I cannot lose. He's going to choose one of my two schools, and I will be perfectly happy regardless, because my family went to KU. The rest of my family went to KU. I go to UMD, so I got to root for both of them. He was deciding between both, and I was like, I'm good regardless. Choose it. You got it, bro. But Maryland ended up with Derek Queen anyway, so I won perfectly. Maryland's got the best team they've had since the pandemic. That team with Cowan and Sticks was really good. But yeah, if you want to see 20,000 people have an out of body experience, go watch Holloman hit a half court shot and devastate thousands of Maryland fans, because that was so brutal, man. They've lost
Absolutely
3
brutal.
games in the last 10 minutes. That was tied. We've lost on 3 game-winning shots. They can't pull it out. They're going to do it in March. I'm going to the Big Ten tournament, so
hopefully the luck will be on their side then.
Yeah, we've gotten all the bad losses out of the way. That's what I'm telling you.
Get them out of the way early. Yeah. Well, that'll do it for the Fountain Cast. Thanks for hopping on with us, guys. Go check out Jack Johnson over at Locked On Royals. Give him a listen as well. Give us a subscribe if you listen on Spotify, if you listen on Apple Podcasts. Drop a rating. Also on YouTube. So give us a subscribe on there. Hit the alert button. You'll know whenever we get new content up there. But more than anything, happy to have the Royals back. Baseball is back. So keep tabs on Farm to Fountains. Got a ton of good work over there. You guys are doing great stuff.
Do what I do. Give it a listen while you fall asleep.
Yeah, on the way to work.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All the nice times. In the car, falling asleep, going for a walk, something like that. Nice to just learn a little something about Royals baseball, or just hear some opinions. You know what I mean?
Just listen. But if you have anything you want to ask, any comments, drop them below. We'll read those live on the next episode. Until next time, it's the Fountain Cast.